Rachel Morley's hands trembled as she opened the letter left on her doorstep, the seventh one this week, bearing anonymous vitriol. "Harlot," it read in bold, angry strokes. Crumpling the paper in her fist, she fought back tears, knowing that in Belmont, Wyoming territory, 1876, a woman's reputation was all she had, and hers was being systematically destroyed. The gossip had started 3 months ago, when her husband Frank died in what the town deemed suspicious circumstances. Frank had fallen from his horse while drunk, breaking his neck on the rocky terrain near their small homestead outside Belmont. But whispers suggested Rachel had somehow orchestrated his death, fueled by the fact that she hadn't shed many tears at the funeral. No one knew about the bruises hidden beneath her high-necked black dress, nor the relief that had washed over her when she realized his hands would never strike her again. Rachel stood on her porch, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming plains. At 24, she should have been in the prime of her life, not a widow ostracized by nearly everyone in town. Her once friendly neighbors now crossed the street to avoid her. The general store owner watched her like a hawk when she shopped, as though expecting her to steal. The women whispered behind gloved hands when she walked past, and men either leered suggestively or stared with open hostility. "Good day, Mrs. Morley," came a voice from behind her. Rachel turned to find Sarah Wilkins, the preacher's wife, standing at the bottom of her porch steps with a small basket. The woman's face was pinched with what appeared to be reluctant duty rather than genuine kindness. "The Ladies' Aid Society thought you might need some provisions," Sarah said, setting the basket down without climbing the steps. "Being alone and all." "Thank you," Rachel replied, her voice even despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Charity." They were offering her charity while simultaneously destroying her name. "Perhaps you might consider attending service on Sunday," Sarah added with a thin smile. "People are talking, Rachel. It's not proper for a young widow to keep to herself so much. People are already talking, Mrs. Wilkins, whether I attend church or not." Sarah's lips pursed. "Well, you know what they say, where there's smoke, there's fire. Good day to you." She turned and hurried away as though afraid contamination might leap from Rachel's porch and follow her home. Rachel waited until Sarah was out of sight before retrieving the basket. Inside were basic supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and a small jar of preserves along with a pamphlet on godly widowhood. Beneath it all was a folded newspaper, open to the gossip column that mentioned her by name, suggesting that a certain young widow had been seen speaking with the new blacksmith at a most inappropriate hour. She had simply been asking him to repair her wagon wheel at 4 in the afternoon. Rachel went inside, closing the door against the world that seemed determined to suffocate her. The small 2-room cabin that had once felt like a prison during Frank's lifetime now felt like her only sanctuary. She placed the basket on her kitchen table and stared at the meager contents. Her pantry was nearly empty, and pride would do nothing to fill her stomach. She would accept their charity, even as they poisoned her name. The next morning, Rachel hitched her old mare to the wagon and made the 4-mile journey into Belmont. Her farm was failing without Frank's labor, though she worked from sunrise to sunset. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, were now calloused and rough. She had planted a small vegetable garden and tended the few chickens they owned, but it wasn't enough. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed work. Belmont was a growing town, prosperous from both cattle and the nearby silver mines. The main street was lined with false-fronted wooden buildings: a hotel, saloon, general store, bank, and various other businesses catering to the cowboys, miners, and settlers who called the area home. As Rachel tied her horse to the hitching post outside the general store, she felt eyes on her from every direction. Inside, Mrs. Peterson, the store owner's wife, watched her suspiciously as she gathered the few items she could afford. Rachel had just placed a small sack of beans on the counter when the bell above the door jangled, and the store fell silent. "Afternoon, ladies," came a deep voice that Rachel didn't recognize. She turned to see a tall man removing his hat as he entered, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned from the sun, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite his serious expression. His clothes were dusty from the trail, marking him as having just arrived in town. "Mr. Williams," Mrs. Peterson said, her demeanor instantly warming. "Welcome back. How was your cattle drive?" "Successful, madam," he replied with a polite nod. "Thought I'd stock up before heading back to the ranch." Rachel turned back to her purchase, hoping to complete her transaction and leave before being subjected to more whispers. She could feel the stranger's eyes on her back. "That'll be 75 cents, Mrs. Peterson said coldly when she turned her attention back to Rachel. Rachel counted out the coins carefully. It was more than the items were worth, but she knew better than to argue. As she gathered her purchases, the stranger stepped forward. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice softer than before, "but I believe I saw a help wanted sign in your window. I'm looking for someone to assist with bookkeeping at my ranch. Might you know anyone suitable?" Mrs. Peterson's eyes narrowed. "I'm sure we can find someone respectable to help you, Mr. Williams. Perhaps Miss Tucker from the schoolhouse." The man Williams glanced at Rachel, who had paused by the door. "I don't believe we've met," he said, extending his hand. "Jackson Williams." Rachel hesitated before taking his hand briefly. "Rachel Morley." She could see Mrs. Peterson's eyes widen in alarm behind him, clearly horrified that she hadn't managed to prevent this introduction. "Mrs. Morley," Jackson said with a nod. "Do you happen to have any experience with numbers?" Before Rachel could answer, Mrs. Peterson interjected. "Mr. Williams, I feel obligated to inform you that Mrs. Morley is not. That is to say, her reputation in town is." Rachel felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. "I should be going," she murmured, turning to leave. "Mrs. Morley," Jackson called after her, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's spluttering. "If you're interested in the position, I'd be happy to discuss it further. My ranch is the Lazy J, about 10 miles west of town." Rachel paused at the door, looking back at his steady gaze. There was something in his eyes, not pity, but a quiet understanding that made her chest tighten. "Thank you, Mr. Williams, but I don't think that would be wise." She pushed through the door, escaping into the bright Wyoming sunshine, leaving behind Mrs. Peterson's furious whispers explaining exactly why Rachel Morley was not a suitable employee for any decent establishment. Outside, Rachel loaded her meager purchases into her wagon, trying to ignore the stares from passers-by. She was just about to climb onto the seat when a commotion from down the street caught her attention. A group of young boys was gathered around something on the ground, laughing and jeering. "Hey, stop that," she called out, recognizing the sound of an animal in distress. Before she could think better of it, Rachel marched toward the group. The boys scattered as she approached, revealing a small dog cowering against a building, its leg clearly injured. "Shaming, ain't it?" came a voice beside her. Jackson Williams had followed her out of the store. "Seems like this town is quick to torment the vulnerable." Rachel knelt beside the trembling animal, ignoring his comment. The dog, some kind of terrier mix, had a deep cut on its hind leg and was filthy from the street. "Poor thing," she murmured, reaching out slowly. The dog growled weakly but allowed her to stroke its head. "Need help getting him to your wagon?" Jackson asked, crouching beside her. Rachel glanced at him. I can't take him. I can barely feed myself. Then I'll take him, Jackson decided, removing his bandana and gently wrapping it around the dog's leg. But I could use your help getting him settled. He seems to trust you. Rachel hesitated, aware that people were watching from storefronts and sidewalks. Taking a breath, she nodded. All right. Together, they carefully carried the injured dog to Jackson's wagon, which was larger and better equipped than Rachel's. The dog whimpered but didn't struggle as they created a makeshift bed from a blanket in the back. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Morley, Jackson said once the dog was settled. That offer of work still stands. Rachel shook her head. You don't know me, Mr. Williams, and it's clear that the town has already informed you of their opinion. I prefer to form my own opinions, he replied. I need someone who can read, write, and handle figures. Mrs. Peterson indicated you might have such skills. No, she indicated I'm not respectable. Rachel's voice was tight. And she's not wrong, according to the good people of Belmont. Jackson studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. My ranch is short-handed, and I need someone to manage the accounts while I focus on the cattle. The position includes room and board if you'd prefer to live at the ranch rather than commute. The offer was tempting, too tempting. A chance to escape the whispers, the letters, the constant judgment. But Rachel knew better than to trust the kindness of a man she'd just met. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Williams, but I have my own place to look after. He nodded, not pressing the issue. The offer remains open should you change your mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. My ranch is due west, following the creek. Can't miss it. Rachel took the card, tucking it into her pocket. I should be going. Good luck with the dog. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Morley, he said, tipping his hat before turning to his wagon. Rachel walked back to her own wagon, feeling the weight of stares and whispers following her. As she climbed onto the seat, she heard a woman's voice carrying clearly across the street. First her husband, now she's setting her cap for the Williams Ranch. That woman has no shame. With burning cheeks, Rachel snapped the reins and headed home, the business card in her pocket feeling like it might burn a hole through the fabric. The next week brought more anonymous letters, each more vicious than the last. Rachel's attempts to find work in town were met with cold refusals. The local newspaper ran a thinly veiled story about women of questionable character trying to ensnare upstanding businessmen. Even the banker, who had been friendly with Frank, refused to discuss extending the mortgage on her property, suggesting instead that a woman in your position might consider selling and moving somewhere more suitable. Rachel was feeding her chickens one morning when she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Looking up, she saw Jackson Williams riding toward her cabin, the small dog they had rescued sitting in front of him on the saddle. The animal's leg was bandaged properly now, and it looked considerably cleaner and healthier. Mrs. Morley, Jackson called, reining in his horse. Hope you don't mind the intrusion. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron. Mr. Williams, what brings you out this way? He dismounted, keeping the dog tucked against him. Scout here wanted to thank his rescuer. The dog's tail wagged at the sound of his name, and I wanted to check if you'd reconsidered my offer. Rachel hesitated. Her situation was growing more desperate by the day. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, and she didn't have nearly enough. Still, caution made her wary. How do I know your offer is genuine, Mr. Williams? You've only just met me. Jackson's expression grew serious. Mrs. Morley, I've been away on a cattle drive for the past 4 months. Whatever situation you find yourself in with the town, I've not been party to it. I need help with my accounts, and you seem like someone who could use a fresh start. He paused. I'm offering employment, nothing more. Rachel studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. There was something straightforward about his gaze that made her want to trust him. "The town will talk," she warned. "The town always talks," he replied with a slight shrug. "I've never much cared for gossip." Rachel looked around at her struggling farm. The vegetable garden was withering in the summer heat. The chicken coop needed repairs she couldn't afford to make, and the house itself had begun to feel like a monument to her failure to thrive alone. "When would you need me to start?" she asked finally. Relief flickered across Jackson's face. "As soon as possible. The accounts are in disarray after my absence. I would need to make arrangements for my property." Jackson nodded. "Take whatever time you need. The position includes quarters at the main house, a small suite of rooms with a private entrance. You'd have your independence while working for me." Rachel weighed her options carefully. Stay and watch her farm fail while the town's hostility grew, or accept this unexpected lifeline from a virtual stranger. Neither choice seemed entirely safe, but at least one offered a path forward. "I accept your offer, Mr. Williams," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I can be ready in 3 days." Jackson's smile was warm. "Excellent. I'll send a wagon for you and your belongings on Friday morning." He set Scout down, and the dog immediately trotted over to Rachel, tail wagging. "Seems like he approves." Rachel knelt to pet the dog, who licked her hand enthusiastically. "You're looking much better, little one. He's a good judge of character," Jackson said, watching them. "Never trusted my foreman from the start. Should have listened to him." "Former foreman?" Rachel asked, noting his phrasing. "Let him go when I returned. Found he'd been skimming from the profits and falsifying the books, which is partly why I need someone honest to help straighten things out." Rachel stood, brushing off her skirt. "I can assure you, Mr. Williams, whatever the town says about me, dishonesty is not among my flaws." "I believe you," he said simply. "Friday, then." "Friday," she agreed. After Jackson left, Rachel sat on her porch steps, considering what she'd just agreed to. The Lazy J Ranch was known to be one of the more prosperous operations in the area. Frank had often spoken enviously of Jackson Williams's success, particularly for a man only a few years older than himself. But working for a single man, living on his property, it would only add fuel to the gossip. Yet what choice did she have? The farm was failing, the town was against her, and the bank was preparing to foreclose. At least this way she would have income and shelter while she figured out her next steps. That evening, Rachel began packing her meager belongings, sorting through what little she had accumulated during her 5-year marriage to Frank. She had come to him with almost nothing: a few dresses, her mother's Bible, and a small jewelry box containing a cameo brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. Frank had provided the necessities but little else. What few books she owned had been purchased with egg money she'd hidden from him, knowing he would consider reading a frivolous waste of time for a farmer's wife. On Thursday afternoon, as Rachel was deciding what to do about her chickens, she heard the now familiar sound of a wagon approaching. Expecting Jackson, she was surprised to see the town's sheriff, Thomas Blackwell, driving up to her cabin instead. "Mrs. Morley," he called, tipping his hat as he climbed down. "Got a moment to talk?" Rachel stepped off her porch, tension coiling in her stomach. The sheriff had been one of Frank's drinking companions and had made it clear after Frank's death that he found the circumstances questionable, though there had been no formal investigation. "Sheriff Blackwell, what can I do for you?" He looked around at the half-packed crates on her porch. "Hear you're leaving us. News traveled fast in Belmont. I've accepted a position as bookkeeper at the Williams Ranch." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Funny, I don't recall Jackson Williams ever needing a bookkeeper before." "His former foreman mismanaged the accounts," Rachel explained, keeping her voice steady. He needs help sorting things out. Uh-huh. Blackwell scratched his chin. And you're just the woman for the job, a farmer's widow with no experience. Rachel lifted her chin. I was a school teacher before I married Frank. I'm quite capable with numbers. That right? He took a step closer. You know, folks in town are mighty concerned about you going out to that ranch. A widow living under the same roof as a bachelor, it ain't proper. I'll have separate quarters with a private entrance, Rachel said, repeating Jackson's assurances. It's a professional arrangement. Sheriff Blackwell snorted. Sure it is. Look, Rachel, I knew Frank. He was my friend. And I know he wouldn't want his widow shaming his memory by moving in with another man barely 3 months after his death. Rachel's hands curled into fists at her sides. Frank's dead, Sheriff. And with all due respect, he doesn't get a say in how I support myself now. The sheriff's expression darkened. You always did have a sharp tongue. Frank mentioned that. He looked around the property again. You're selling up then? Not yet, Rachel answered. I'm keeping the property for now. Might not be yours to keep much longer. Heard the bank's looking to foreclose. Rachel stiffened. Is there something specific you wanted, Sheriff? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Just a friendly warning. People are talking about Frank's death again, about how convenient it was for you, how quick you are to move on. He fingered the badge on his chest. Might be worth looking into a bit deeper. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Rachel kept her expression neutral, though her heart hammered in her chest. Are you accusing me of something, Sheriff? Not accusing, just saying how it looks. He backed up, returning to his wagon. You have a nice day now, Mrs. Morley. Think about what I said. As he drove away, Rachel sank onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly weak. The sheriff's visit was no coincidence. Someone in town had sent him to intimidate her. The thought of leaving now seemed both more dangerous and more necessary than ever. Friday morning dawned clear and bright. Rachel had been awake since before sunrise, finishing her packing and securing the cabin as best she could. She'd arranged for a neighboring farmer to take her chickens in exchange for checking on her property occasionally. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would have to do. The wagon from the Lazy J arrived precisely at 9, driven not by Jackson, but by an older man who introduced himself as Caleb, the ranch cook and general handyman. Mr. Williams sent me to fetch you, madam, he said, helping load her trunks and crates. He's dealing with a situation at the north pasture. A situation? Rachel asked, securing the last of her belongings. Couple of steers broke through the fence. Caleb shrugged. Nothing serious, just keeping him busy. The journey to the Lazy J took nearly 2 hours, following the creek just as Jackson had described. As they crested a hill, the ranch spread out before them, a large main house built of sturdy logs and stone, several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, and corrals full of horses. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling green pastures backed by the mountain range that gave Wyoming its dramatic landscape. It's beautiful, Rachel murmured, taking in the sight. Caleb nodded, pride evident in his weathered face. Boss built most of it himself. Started with just 100 acres and a dream 10 years ago. As they approached the main house, Rachel spotted Scout lying on the porch. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of the wagon, and he bounded down to greet them, his injured leg clearly healing well. Little fella's taken to you, Caleb observed as Scout danced around Rachel when she climbed down from the wagon. Usually doesn't cotton to strangers. We've met before, Rachel explained, bending to pet the excited dog. He remembers. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her 50s, with graying dark hair pulled into a neat bun and a kind face lined with experience. You must be Mrs. Morley, she said, coming forward with an outstretched hand. "I'm Martha Johnson, the housekeeper. Mr. Williams asked me to get you settled until he returns." Rachel shook her hand, relieved by the woman's friendly demeanor. "Thank you. Please call me Rachel." Martha smiled warmly. "Welcome to the Lazy J, Rachel. Let's get you and your things inside, and then I'll show you around." With Caleb's help, they brought Rachel's belongings to her quarters, a comfortable suite consisting of a bedroom, a small sitting room, and a private bathroom with a copper tub. True to Jackson's word, there was a separate entrance that opened onto a side porch overlooking a small garden. "Mr. Williams had these rooms renovated specifically for you," Martha explained, opening the curtains to let in more light. "Used to be storage, if you can believe it." Rachel ran her hand along the freshly painted wall. "He did this in a week," Martha chuckled. "Had all the ranch hands helping. Never seen them work so fast on something that wasn't fence repair." She gave Rachel an appraising look. "The boss must think highly of your skills." "I haven't proven them yet," Rachel said, suddenly nervous about living up to expectations. "You will," Martha said confidently. "Now, let me show you the office where you'll be working." The office was located in the main part of the house, a well-lit room with large windows overlooking the front of the property. A substantial oak desk dominated the space, currently covered with stacks of ledgers, receipts, and correspondence. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with reference materials and what appeared to be years of financial records. "It's a mess, I know," Martha said apologetically. "Boss tried to keep up with it himself after firing Chester, that was the foreman, but with the cattle drive and everything else." "It's fine," Rachel assured her, already mentally organizing how she would approach the work. "I like a challenge." Martha showed her the rest of the house, a spacious living room with comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. A formal dining room they rarely used, preferring the large kitchen table, and Jackson's private study and bedroom, which were on the opposite side of the house from Rachel's quarters. "The men eat in the bunkhouse," Martha explained as they returned to the kitchen. "But Mr. Williams takes his meals here, and you're welcome to join him or dine in your rooms as you prefer." "I wouldn't want to intrude," Rachel said. Martha gave her a knowing look. "The boss specifically mentioned that he hoped you'd join him. Said something about discussing business over meals being efficient." She smiled. "Between you and me, I think he's just tired of eating alone or with Caleb and me as his only company." Before Rachel could respond, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Through the window, she could see Jackson dismounting from a handsome bay gelding, accompanied by 2 ranch hands. "Perfect timing," Martha said. "I've got lunch nearly ready. Why don't you get washed up, and I'll tell the boss you've arrived safely." Left alone in her new quarters, Rachel took a moment to absorb the dramatic change in her circumstances. Just a week ago, she had been facing financial ruin and social ostracism. Now she was installed in comfortable rooms on one of the region's most prosperous ranches, about to begin a new chapter of her life. It seemed almost too good to be true, which made her nervous. In her experience, when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. After washing up and changing into a fresh dress, Rachel made her way to the kitchen, where she found Jackson already seated at the table, talking with Martha as she laid out a lunch of cold chicken, bread, and fresh vegetables from the garden. He stood when Rachel entered. "Mrs. Morley, welcome to the Lazy J. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Very, thank you," she replied, taking the seat he pulled out for her. "You have a beautiful ranch, Mr. Williams." "Jackson, please," he said, resuming his seat. "If we're to work together, I'd prefer to dispense with formalities." Rachel hesitated, aware of Martha moving quietly around the kitchen. "Then you must call me Rachel." Lunch passed pleasantly, with Jackson asking thoughtful questions about her background and experience. Rachel found herself sharing more than she had intended, telling him about her years teaching school in Colorado before marrying Frank and moving to Wyoming. "Why did you stop teaching?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his eyes. Rachel's hand stilled on her water glass. Frank didn't approve of having a working wife. He said it reflected poorly on his ability to provide. Jackson's expression darkened slightly. "I see." "It was expected," Rachel said, not wanting to speak ill of her late husband despite everything. "Most men feel the same." "Not all of us," Jackson countered, then changed the subject smoothly. "I thought we might review the accounts this afternoon to give you an overview of what needs attention." After lunch, they moved to the office, where Jackson explained the ranch operations, the cattle business that was his primary income, a small horse breeding program he had recently started, and various investments in local businesses. The financial records were indeed in disarray, with missing entries, inconsistent bookkeeping methods, and what appeared to be deliberate obfuscation by the former foreman. "It's quite a mess," Rachel admitted, flipping through the most recent ledger. "But I can sort it out. It will just take time." "Time is something we have," Jackson assured her. "I'm just grateful to have someone competent handling it." As the afternoon wore on, Rachel found herself relaxing in Jackson's company. He was easy to talk to, respectful of her opinions, and genuinely interested in her suggestions for improving the record-keeping system. By the time Martha called them for dinner, they had established a comfortable working rapport that gave Rachel hope that this new arrangement might succeed. The next few weeks fell into a pleasant routine. Rachel spent her days organizing the ranch accounts, creating a new bookkeeping system, and corresponding with Jackson's business associates. In the evenings, she often joined him for dinner, where their conversations ranged from ranch business to books they had both read to gentle debates about politics and the future of the Wyoming territory. She learned that Jackson had come west from Pennsylvania as a young man of 18, working as a cowhand, before saving enough to buy his first small parcel of land. Now, at 32, he had built the Lazy J into one of the most respected ranches in the region, known for fair dealings and quality stock. Rachel found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. Jackson was different from Frank in every way that mattered: thoughtful where Frank had been impulsive, gentle where Frank had been harsh, and respectful where Frank had been demanding. He treated his ranch hands with the same courtesy he showed to Martha and Caleb, and even the animals responded to his calm, steady presence. Scout had appointed himself Rachel's personal companion, following her from her rooms to the office each morning, and often accompanying her on walks around the ranch in the evenings. Jackson joked that the dog had clearly transferred his allegiance, but she noticed he always made sure Scout slept by the fireplace in the main house each night, safe and warm. One evening, about a month after Rachel's arrival, Jackson found her sitting on the porch outside her rooms, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Scout lay at her feet, content and drowsy. "Mind if I join you?" Jackson asked, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses in his hands. Rachel smiled, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please do." He poured them each a glass and settled into the chair. "Martha mentioned you received a letter from town today." Rachel tensed slightly. She had indeed received a letter from the banker in Belmont, informing her that despite her absence, the mortgage on her property remained overdue. "News travels fast. Small ranch," Jackson said with a slight smile. "Everything all right?" Rachel sipped her wine, considering how much to share. "The bank is threatening to foreclose on my property. I've managed to send them some money from my wages, but it's not enough. Jackson frowned. I thought we agreed your first month's salary would go entirely to settling your affairs. We did, Rachel assured him, and I'm grateful. But the truth is, the property was mortgaged for more than it's worth. Frank, she hesitated. Frank had debts I wasn't aware of until after his death. Gambling, Jackson asked quietly. Rachel nodded. Among other things. She stared out at the darkening landscape. The truth is, I'm not sure I want to keep the property. There are too many difficult memories there. Jackson was silent for a moment. Then why try to save it? It was a good question, one Rachel had asked herself repeatedly. Because it's all I have, she finally admitted. Because if I let it go, it's like admitting I've failed. You haven't failed, Rachel, Jackson said, his voice low and earnest. You've survived. There's a difference. She glanced at him, struck by the understanding in his eyes. Most people wouldn't see it that way. I'm not most people. He took a sip of his wine. And neither are you. The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Rachel looked away first, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine. I should turn in, she said, rising from her chair. There's still a lot of work to do on those quarterly reports. Jackson stood as well. Of course. But Rachel, he waited until she met his eyes again. Don't worry about the property. We'll figure something out. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and retreated to her rooms. Once inside, she leaned against the closed door, her heart beating too fast. She was growing too comfortable here, too attached to this man and his quiet kindness. It was dangerous territory for a woman whose reputation was already in tatters. The next morning, Rachel found a stack of newspapers on her desk when she entered the office. They were from various towns in the region, all open to advertisements for properties for sale. Thought you might want to consider your options, Jackson said from the doorway. If you decide to sell your place, it might be worth looking at alternatives. Rachel thumbed through the papers, touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. I'll look these over. Take your time, he said. And if you'd like to ride out and see any of them, just say the word. As July turned to August, the heat intensified, and work on the ranch shifted to preparing for the coming fall and winter. Rachel had finally sorted through the financial mess left by Chester, the former foreman, and presented Jackson with a complete accounting of the ranch's true financial position, which was considerably healthier than the books had initially suggested. You've done remarkable work, Jackson told her one evening as they reviewed her findings. I knew Chester was skimming, but I had no idea how creative he'd been about hiding it. Rachel smiled, pleased by the compliment. Once I understood his pattern, it was just a matter of working backward through the records. Still, it was impressive detective work. Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her. You know, with the accounts in order, we should consider expanding your role here. Oh. Rachel looked up from the ledger she was closing. What did you have in mind? The truth is, I could use help with more than just the books. I've been thinking about adding more breeding stock to the horse program, perhaps expanding into training as well. It would require someone to manage the business end while I focus on the livestock. Rachel considered the proposition. Are you offering me a partnership of sorts? In a way, yes, Jackson admitted. You have a good head for business, Rachel, better than mine if I'm being honest. I'm a rancher at heart. I understand cattle and horses, land and weather. But the ledgers and correspondence, the contracts and negotiations, those aren't my natural strengths. The offer was both flattering and frightening. A partnership would bind her more tightly to the ranch and to Jackson himself. I'll need to think about it, she said cautiously. He nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her hesitation. Of course, there's no rush. But there was a new tension between them after that conversation. an awareness that their arrangement was shifting from employer and employee to something less defined. Rachel found herself noticing things about Jackson. She had tried to ignore the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands when he helped her down from the wagon, the deep timbre of his laugh when something genuinely amused him. She told herself it was natural to develop affection for someone who had shown her kindness when she needed it most. But in her heart, she knew it was more than gratitude she felt when their hands accidentally touched, or when she caught him watching her with that quiet intensity that made her breath catch. A week after Jackson's proposal, Rachel was in town with Martha, shopping for supplies. It was her first visit to Belmont since she'd left for the Lazy J, and she was nervous about facing the gossips again. "Hold your head high," Martha advised as they pulled up in front of the general store. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." Rachel nodded, squaring her shoulders as she climbed down from the wagon. She had barely set foot on the boardwalk when Mrs. Peterson emerged from the store, her eyes widening at the sight of Rachel. "Well, look who's back," she called, loud enough for passers-by to hear. The widow Morley gracing us with her presence. Rachel forced a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. I'm here with Mrs. Johnson to pick up supplies for the ranch." Mrs. Peterson's gaze flicked to Martha, then back to Rachel. "I see. And how are you finding life at the Williams Ranch?" "Comfortable, I imagine." The insinuation was clear, and Rachel felt her cheeks warm despite her resolve to remain composed. Before she could respond, Martha stepped forward, her expression stern. "Mrs. Morley has been an invaluable addition to the ranch," she said firmly. "Mr. Williams says he doesn't know how he managed without her professional expertise." Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "I'm sure that's not all he's managing with." "That's quite enough, Harriet," came a new voice. Sheriff Blackwell approached, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Ladies," he nodded to Rachel and Martha. "What brings you to town today?" "Just supplies, Sheriff," Rachel answered, keeping her voice steady. "We won't be staying long." "That's a shame," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I was hoping to have a word with you about that property of yours." Bank's getting mighty impatient. Martha stepped closer to Rachel. "Mr. Williams has authorized me to inform you that arrangements are being made regarding Mrs. Morley's property. The bank will receive payment in full by the end of the month." Rachel turned to Martha in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of such arrangements. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? How generous of Mr. Williams to take such an interest in Mrs. Morley's affairs." "The ranch takes care of its own," Martha replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to." She steered Rachel into the store, leaving the sheriff and Mrs. Peterson staring after them. Once inside, Rachel pulled Martha aside. "What arrangement with the bank?" she whispered. "Jackson never mentioned this to me." Martha looked apologetic. "He wanted to surprise you." "He's been negotiating with the bank to buy your mortgage. Said it was a sound investment for the ranch." Rachel felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a flicker of unease. "He shouldn't have done that without discussing it with me." "He meant well," Martha said gently. "And he was planning to tell you tonight. I just couldn't stand by and let that woman and the sheriff bait you like that." Rachel nodded, understanding Martha's impulse to defend her. "Thank you, but I need to speak with Jackson about this as soon as we return." The rest of their visit to town was mercifully uneventful, though Rachel was conscious of whispers and stares following them as they completed their errands. By the time they started back to the ranch, her nerves were frayed from the constant scrutiny. "Don't let them get to you," Martha advised, noticing Rachel's tension. "Small towns have long memories, but eventually they find someone else to gossip about." "It's not just gossip," Rachel said quietly. "The sheriff still has questions about Frank's death." Martha glanced at her sharply. What kind of questions? Rachel stared at the dusty road ahead. Frank was drunk the night he died. He'd been in town, gambling and drinking, and lost money he couldn't afford to lose when he came home. She swallowed hard. He was in a rage. He'd hit me before, but never like that night. Martha's hands tightened on the reins. You don't have to tell me this, Rachel. I need someone to know the truth, Rachel insisted. He was beating me, and I managed to push him away. He stumbled backward out the door and fell off the porch. It wasn't high, just 3 steps. But he was so drunk he couldn't catch himself, and he hit his head on a rock. She took a shaky breath. I tried to help him, but his neck, I could tell it was broken. He died right there with me holding him. Martha was quiet for a long moment. It was an accident, she finally said. You were defending yourself. Yes, Rachel agreed, but the sheriff doesn't know that. No one does. All anyone saw was that I didn't cry at the funeral, that I seemed relieved rather than devastated. She shook her head. And they weren't wrong. I was relieved. What kind of woman feels relief when her husband dies? A woman who's been abused, Martha said firmly. Rachel, you have nothing to feel guilty about. Frank's death was a tragic accident, but what he did to you was deliberate cruelty. Rachel wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. Thank you for saying that, but it doesn't change how the town sees me. No, Martha conceded, but it might change how you see yourself. When they returned to the ranch, Rachel found Jackson waiting for them, helping Caleb unload the wagon. He smiled when he saw her, but his expression sobered when he noticed her red-rimmed eyes. Everything all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. We need to talk, Rachel said quietly. About the bank. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ah, Martha told you. She had to. The sheriff was questioning me in front of half the town. Jackson's jaw tightened. Blackwell needs to mind his own business. Can we discuss this privately? Rachel asked, conscious of Caleb and Martha pretending not to listen. Of course. Jackson turned to the others. We'll be in my study if anyone needs us. Once they were alone in the book-lined room where Jackson handled his personal correspondence, Rachel turned to face him. Why didn't you tell me you were buying my mortgage? I was going to tell you tonight, he explained. I wanted to have everything finalized first. It's my property, Jackson, my debt. You should have consulted me. He had the grace to look chagrined. You're right, I apologize, He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. I hate seeing what that town is doing to you, the way they treat you, the things they say. When the banker mentioned foreclosure proceedings, I saw a way to help. I don't need charity, Rachel said, lifting her chin. It's not charity, Jackson insisted. It's an investment. Your property adjoins the northeast corner of the ranch. I've been trying to expand in that direction for years. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. But you're right. I should have talked to you first. It was presumptuous of me. Rachel studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. So this is purely a business decision, nothing to do with personal considerations. Jackson hesitated, and in that moment, Rachel knew there was more to it than ranch expansion. Not purely business, no, he admitted. I care about what happens to you, Rachel. I don't like seeing you hurt. The simple honesty of his statement disarmed her. I care about you too, she said softly. But I've been dependent on a man before, Jackson. I won't do it again. He nodded slowly. I understand. How about this? We structure it as a loan. You keep the property in your name and you repay me at a fair interest rate from your earnings, complete with proper paperwork, everything above board. It was a reasonable solution, one that would preserve her independence while resolving her immediate financial crisis. That would be acceptable, Rachel agreed. Thank you. You're welcome. Jackson smiled, relief evident in his expression. Now about that partnership we discussed. One thing at a time, Rachel said, returning his smile despite herself. Let's get the property sorted first. As they worked out the details of the loan agreement, Rachel found herself wondering what it would be like to truly be Jackson's partner not just in business, but in life. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After Frank, she had vowed never to make herself vulnerable to a man again. But Jackson was proving, day by day, that not all men were like her late husband. The following Sunday, Rachel was surprised when Jackson asked if she would accompany him to church in Belmont. She had been avoiding town as much as possible, content to spend quiet Sundays at the ranch. "Are you sure that's wise?" she asked, remembering the stares and whispers from her last visit. "People will talk." Jackson's expression was determined. "Let them. I've been attending that church since I built this ranch, and I won't let gossip keep us away." He paused, watching her face. "Unless you'd rather not go," Rachel considered refusing, then steeled herself. "No, I'll go. I won't hide forever." The small white church on the edge of town was already filling with families when Jackson's buggy pulled up. Rachel, wearing her best dress, a navy blue frock with white piping that Martha had helped her alter to fit better, felt conspicuous as Jackson helped her down. Scout, who had insisted on accompanying them despite Jackson's attempts to leave him behind, trotted happily at their heels. "Animals aren't allowed inside," Rachel reminded Jackson, nodding toward the dog. "He can wait on the steps," Jackson replied. "He's good at waiting when he knows we're coming back." They had barely reached the church steps when Reverend Wilkins emerged to greet the arriving congregants. His smile faltered visibly when he spotted Rachel. "Mr. Williams," he said, recovering quickly. "Good to see you back in service." "And, Mrs. Morley, this is a surprise." "Reverend," Rachel acknowledged with a polite nod. "Mrs. Morley is my guest today," Jackson said, his tone pleasant but firm. "I trust that won't be a problem." The Reverend glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Of course not. All are welcome in God's house." Inside, they took seats near the back, though Jackson usually sat closer to the front. Rachel was aware of heads turning, conversations pausing, and curious stares following their progress. She kept her gaze straight ahead, determined not to show how much the scrutiny affected her. Mrs. Wilkins, the Reverend's wife who had delivered the charity basket months ago, leaned over to whisper something to Mrs. Peterson in the pew ahead. Both women turned to look at Rachel, their expressions a mixture of disapproval and avid curiosity. Jackson, seemingly oblivious to the stir they were causing, opened the hymnal and offered to share it with Rachel. His shoulder pressed against hers, warm and solid, giving her strength to endure the coming hour. The service itself was unremarkable, with Reverend Wilkins delivering a sermon on forgiveness and redemption that seemed pointed in its references to sin and repentance. Rachel kept her expression neutral throughout, though she felt the weight of judgment from those around her. When the service ended, Jackson placed a hand at the small of her back as they exited, a subtle but clear gesture of support. Outside, Scout greeted them enthusiastically, drawing smiles from some of the children despite their parents' attempts to hurry them along. "Jackson, a word if you don't mind." Sheriff Blackwell approached, his expression congenial though his eyes were sharp. "And Mrs. Morley, looking lovely as always." "Thomas," Jackson acknowledged. "What can I do for you?" The sheriff's gaze flicked to Rachel, then back to Jackson. "Just wondering if you've had a chance to consider my proposal about those water rights. With the dry spell we've been having, access to the creek is becoming more valuable." "I've considered it," Jackson replied evenly. "And as I mentioned before, I'm not interested in selling." The creek runs through my property, and I'm happy to allow reasonable access for watering cattle, but the rights remain with the ranch." The sheriff's smile tightened. "Might want to reconsider. Word is, the county's looking to reassess property lines in that area. Could be complications." Rachel felt Jackson tense beside her, though his expression remained calm. "Is that a threat, Thomas?" "Just sharing information," Blackwell said, raising his hands in a gesture of innocence. "As sheriff, it's my job to keep citizens informed of potential issues." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Rachel. "Speaking of issues, Mrs. Morley, I hear you've resolved your banking troubles. Mighty convenient." "Mrs. Morley's financial arrangements are her business," Jackson said before Rachel could respond. "And mine as her employer." "Employer? Is that what they're calling it these days?" The sheriff smirked. "Well, you two enjoy your Sunday. Beautiful day for a drive, isn't it? Almost as pretty as the day Frank Morley took his fatal tumble." He tipped his hat and sauntered away, leaving Rachel pale and shaken. Jackson placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Don't let him get to you," he murmured. "He's fishing for a reaction." "He's implying I had something to do with Frank's death," Rachel whispered, aware of curious onlookers watching their exchange. "He has no proof of anything," Jackson assured her. "It's just talk, trying to pressure me about those water rights." "What did he mean about reassessing property lines?" Jackson's expression darkened. "It's a long-standing dispute. The creek forms the boundary between my ranch and land owned by the Blackwell family. Thomas's brother is on the county commission and has been trying to shift the line eastward, which would put the water on their property instead of mine." Rachel was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "And my property is part of this dispute, potentially," Jackson admitted. "Your land sits at a crucial junction where the creek branches. If they can claim that section, it strengthens their position on the rest." The implications were troubling. "So when you offered to buy my mortgage?" "It was partly strategic," Jackson acknowledged. "But that doesn't mean I wasn't also concerned about you. Both things can be true, Rachel." She nodded, absorbing this new information as they walked to the buggy. It was naive to think Jackson's interest in her property was solely about helping her. Of course he had other motives. He was a businessman after all. The question was whether his personal interest in her was equally calculated. As if reading her thoughts, Jackson stopped before helping her into the buggy. "Rachel, I want you to know something. Whatever complications exist with the land and the sheriff, my feelings for you are entirely separate. I hope you believe that." The sincerity in his eyes was difficult to doubt. "I do," she said softly, and realized as the words left her mouth that she meant them. Despite her wariness, despite the walls she had built around her heart after Frank, she trusted Jackson Williams. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the hill that provided the first view of the Lazy J, Jackson finally broke the silence. "I received a letter yesterday that I've been meaning to share with you," he said, slowing the horses. "It's from the Eastern Wyoming Cattlemen's Association. They're hosting their annual meeting in Cheyenne next month and have asked me to speak about modern ranching methods." "That sounds like an honor," Rachel replied, wondering why he seemed hesitant. "It is, and I was hoping you might accompany me." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "It would be a good opportunity to establish business contacts for the ranch and—" He cleared his throat. "I'd enjoy your company." Rachel considered the invitation. A trip to Cheyenne would mean several days away from the ranch, traveling and staying with Jackson in a more public setting than their current arrangement. It would inevitably fuel more gossip. But it would also be a chance to see beyond Belmont, to experience the wider world she had once dreamed of before marriage confined her horizons. "I'd like that," she decided, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "Thank you for asking me." Jackson's smile was worth any risk of scandal. "Excellent. We'll leave in 3 weeks. That should give us time to prepare the ranch for our absence and for you to acquire anything you might need for the trip." The following days were busy with preparations, both for the upcoming journey and for the fall cattle operations that would begin shortly after their return. Rachel found herself immersed in correspondence with potential buyers, arrangements for shipping, and finalization of the loan documents for her property. Through it all, her awareness of Jackson grew, as did his apparent interest in her. It manifested in small ways: his hand lingering when he passed her documents, the way his gaze sought hers across the dinner table, the thoughtful gifts that appeared on her desk. A leather-bound journal, a fountain pen with her initials engraved on the barrel, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Nothing inappropriate, nothing presumptuous, but clear indications that she was more to him than just an employee. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jackson finally spoke of what had been growing between them. "Rachel," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I hope you know how much I value your presence here, not just for your work, which has been exceptional, but for everything else you've brought to this ranch, to my life." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "I value being here as well," she said carefully. "You've given me a chance to rebuild when I thought all was lost. It's more than that, though, isn't it?" He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "At least for me it is." Rachel looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "Jackson, I care for you, more than I expected to, more than I thought I could after Frank, but I'm afraid of what people will say." She shook her head. "No, of being wrong again. Of trusting my heart when it failed me so badly before." Jackson reached across the space between them, taking one of her hands in his. "Frank Morley was not a good man, Rachel. From everything I've heard, from what little you've shared, he hurt you in ways no husband should ever hurt his wife." Rachel stiffened. "What have you heard?" "Enough," he said gently. "Small towns talk, and not all the gossip about you was malicious. Some people saw the bruises, Rachel. Some people knew and did nothing." Tears welled in her eyes despite her attempts to contain them. "I should have left him before it happened." "You survived," Jackson said, echoing his words from months ago. "And now you have a chance to thrive." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I just want you to know that whatever happens between us, it will be your choice. I'll never pressure you, never rush you, and most importantly, never harm you." A tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. Jackson reached up with his free hand, gently brushing it away with his thumb. The tenderness of the gesture undid her last defenses, and she leaned toward him, drawn by a force stronger than fear. His kiss was gentle, questioning rather than demanding, and Rachel felt something within her unfurl, like a flower long denied sunlight. She returned the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they drew apart, Jackson's eyes were bright with emotion. "I've wanted to do that since the day I found you helping that dog," he admitted with a small smile. Rachel laughed softly, surprising herself with the lightness she felt. "Scout knew what he was doing, bringing us together." As if on cue, the dog in question pushed his nose between them, tail wagging hopefully. Jackson chuckled, scratching behind Scout's ears. "Yes, you clever mutt. You knew exactly what you were doing." That night, Rachel lay awake long after retiring to her room, her mind replaying the kiss, the conversation, the sense of possibility that had opened before her. For the first time since Frank's death, perhaps for the first time in years, She allowed herself to imagine a future filled with joy rather than mere survival. But as she drifted toward sleep, a shadow crossed her thoughts. Sheriff Blackwell's insinuations about Frank's death, the water rights dispute, the tangled connections between her property and Jackson's ranch. There were complications here that a kiss, however sweet, couldn't resolve. If she gave her heart to Jackson Williams, she would be binding her fate to his in ways that extended far beyond romance. Was she ready for that? Could she trust not just the man, but the future he represented? The questions followed her into uneasy dreams, where Frank's angry face morphed into the sheriff's suspicious glare, and a creek overflowed its banks, washing away boundaries and certainties. The next morning, Rachel found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter written in Jackson's bold, clear hand. Rachel, last night I spoke from my heart, perhaps more freely than wisdom would dictate. I want you to know that nothing has changed in our professional arrangement. Your position here is secure regardless of your feelings toward me. I value your work and your contributions to the ranch above all else. But I also want you to know that what I feel for you is real and growing stronger each day. I see in you a strength and grace that amazes me, a resilience that inspires me, and a kindness that humbles me. You once told me you were branded by gossip, marked by the cruel words and judgments of others who knew nothing of your true character. I want you to know that in my eyes, you are free from those judgments. Free to be yourself, to make your own choices, to build the life you deserve. Whatever you decide about us, whether friendship or something more, know that you have my respect and admiration always. Yours, Jackson. Rachel read the letter twice, tracing her fingers over the words, "You are free." Freedom from judgment, from fear, from the shadows of her past, was a gift she hadn't realized how desperately she needed until Jackson offered it. She found him in the stables, checking a mare that was due to foal soon. The morning sunlight streamed through the open door, highlighting the gold in his hair as he straightened at her approach. "Good morning," he said, uncertainty in his eyes as he tried to gauge her reaction to his letter. Rachel held up the folded paper. "Did you mean it? All of it?" "Every word," he affirmed without hesitation. She took a step closer. "Then I have something to say to you, Jackson Williams." He waited, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "I've spent the last 5 years of my life being afraid," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Afraid of Frank's temper, afraid of being trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing me, afraid of what would happen if I tried to leave. And after he died, I was afraid of the gossip, afraid of losing everything, afraid of what people thought of me." She took another step forward. "I'm tired of being afraid." Jackson's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. "Your letter says I'm free," Rachel continued, "free to make my own choices, so this is my choice." She closed the remaining distance between them, placing her hands on his chest. "I choose to trust what I feel for you. I choose to explore what we might become together. I choose you, Jackson." The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, more certain, full of promise and possibility. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of that choice," he murmured. "I know you will," Rachel replied. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt completely certain of something, of someone. The 3 weeks leading up to their trip to Cheyenne passed in a blur of work and discovery. During the days, Rachel and Jackson maintained their professional relationship, focusing on ranch operations and preparations for their absence. But evenings were spent together, talking long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, and slowly building the foundation of something that felt increasingly like love. Rachel wrote to the bank, formally accepting Jackson's loan offer and finalizing the arrangements to retain her property. She wasn't entirely sure what she would do with it in the long term, but having options felt like another kind of freedom. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days by train, with an overnight stay in Laramie. Jackson had reserved separate rooms at both hotels, mindful of Rachel's reputation, despite the growing closeness between them. The cattle convention was a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and social events, with Jackson introducing Rachel to influential ranchers, businessmen, and their wives as my partner, Mrs. Morley. The designation raised eyebrows, but Rachel handled the subtle questions and curious glances with newfound confidence. She was no longer the scandal-plagued widow of Belmont, but a businesswoman representing one of the territory's most promising ranches. And with Jackson beside her, supporting her ideas and deferring to her expertise on financial matters, she began to see herself through his eyes, capable, intelligent, and worthy of respect. On their final evening in Cheyenne, after a successful dinner with potential investors in the horse breeding program, Jackson took Rachel for a walk through the city park. The September evening was cool, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You were magnificent tonight," he told her, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "The Hargrove brothers were ready to commit twice their initial investment after your presentation." Rachel smiled, pleased by the praise but even more by the genuine pride in his voice. "It's easy to be persuasive when you believe in what you're selling. Those horses are exceptional, Jackson, and your breeding program is innovative." "Our breeding program," he corrected gently. "If you're still interested in that partnership we discussed." She looked up at him. "I am. But I've been thinking about the terms." "Oh," he guided her to a bench overlooking a small pond. "Yes," Rachel took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I think we should consider a more permanent arrangement." Jackson's eyes widened slightly. "Rachel, are you proposing?" She laughed softly. "Perhaps I am. Is that terribly forward of me?" His smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. "Terribly and wonderfully." He took both her hands in his. "But if you don't mind, I'd like to do this properly." To Rachel's astonishment, he slipped from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Rachel Morley, these past months have shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to respect them, to want their happiness above all else. You've brought order to my accounts, perspective to my business decisions, and joy to days I didn't even realize were lacking it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I love you, Rachel. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Inside the box was a ring not ostentatious, but beautifully crafted, with a single diamond flanked by smaller sapphires that reminded Rachel of Wyoming's clear blue skies. "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you, Jackson." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to sit beside her, drawing her into a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they returned to the ranch a few days later, Martha took one look at the ring on Rachel's finger and burst into happy tears. "About time," she declared, hugging them both. "I've been watching you two dance around each other for months." Caleb was equally pleased, though more reserved in his congratulations. "Boss couldn't have chosen better," he told Rachel with a gruff pat on her shoulder, "and that's the truth." Scout, naturally, expressed his approval by refusing to leave Rachel's side for the entire day, his tail wagging so vigorously it threatened to sweep small objects from tables. News of their engagement spread quickly through the area, reaching Belmont within days. The reactions were mixed, some genuinely happy for Jackson, others scandalized by the rapid progression from employer-employee to betrothed, and still others openly envious of Rachel's good fortune. Sheriff Blackwell made a point of riding out to the ranch the following week, ostensibly to discuss county business but clearly curious about the engagement. "Heard congratulations are in order," he said, after Jackson had reluctantly invited him into the study. "Moving mighty fast, aren't you?" "When you know something's right, there's no point in waiting," Jackson replied evenly. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, Thomas?" The sheriff's gaze flicked to Rachel, who had insisted on being present, sensing that her absence would only fuel his suspicions. "Just wondering how this might affect our discussions about those water rights. With the wedding and all, maybe you're reconsidering your position." Jackson's expression hardened. "My position hasn't changed. The creek remains part of the Lazy J, confirmed by the original land grants and subsequent surveys. And Mrs. Morley's property." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "I understand you've taken over her mortgage. Convenient arrangement." "Mr. Williams provided a loan," Rachel interjected, keeping her voice steady despite her dislike for the man. "The property remains in my name." "For now," Blackwell smirked, "though I imagine that will change after the wedding. Everything belonging to the wife becomes the husband's property, isn't that right? Just like with Frank." Rachel felt Jackson tense beside her but placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My arrangement with Mr. Williams includes provisions to protect my interests," she said coolly. "Not that it's any of your concern, Sheriff." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "Everything in this county is my concern, Mrs. Morley, including suspicious deaths and convenient marriages." Jackson stood, his patience clearly exhausted. "I think you should leave, Thomas. Any official business can be conducted through proper channels." The sheriff rose slowly, adjusting his hat. "Just doing my job, Williams, making sure everything's above board." He nodded to Rachel. "Mrs. Morley, enjoy your good fortune while it lasts." After he departed, Rachel sank into a chair, suddenly drained. "He's never going to let it go, is he? The questions about Frank's death." Jackson knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "He has no evidence, Rachel, only suspicions and spite." "But what if—" she hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "What if he somehow finds out what really happened that night? That I pushed Frank, that I was the reason he fell?" "You were defending yourself," Jackson said firmly. "Frank was drunk and violent. You had every right to protect yourself." Rachel shook her head. "A jury might not see it that way, especially with the sheriff painting me as a scheming widow who killed one husband to get a better one." Jackson's expression grew serious. "Rachel, listen to me. I won't let anything happen to you. But if you're truly concerned, perhaps we should consider legal advice, someone who could help if Blackwell ever tries to build a case." The suggestion was practical, but it highlighted the shadow that still hung over their happiness. "I'm sorry," Rachel said quietly. "I never meant to bring this trouble to your door." "Don't apologize," Jackson insisted. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means, sharing burdens as well as joys." His words comforted her, but the sheriff's visit had reopened wounds Rachel had hoped were healing. That night, for the first time since their engagement, nightmares of Frank's death returned, more vivid than before. She woke gasping, heart pounding, the memory of Frank's lifeless eyes staring up at her still fresh in her mind. Unable to return to sleep, Rachel slipped from her bed and made her way to the porch outside her rooms. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the autumn chill, trying to find peace in the beauty above her. "Can't sleep," Martha's voice startled her. The housekeeper emerged from the shadows, a steaming cup in her hands. "Thought you might need this, hot milk with a touch of honey." Rachel accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you, did I wake you?" Martha shook her head, settling into the chair beside Rachel's. Been having trouble sleeping myself lately. Old age, I suppose. She studied Rachel's face in the moonlight. But your troubles aren't from age, are they? It's the sheriff's visit that's got you worried. Am I that transparent? Only to those who care about you. Martha patted Rachel's arm. Want to talk about it? Rachel sipped the warm milk, considering. She had already shared the truth about Frank's death with Martha, but not her deepest fear. What if I'm making a terrible mistake, Martha? What if I'm bringing danger to Jackson by marrying him? Because of the sheriff's suspicions. Rachel nodded. Blackwell wants those water rights. He's using Frank's death as leverage, implying he could cause trouble for me if Jackson doesn't cooperate. Martha was quiet for a moment. You know, I've been with the Williams family since Jackson was a boy. Worked for his parents back east, then came west with him when he decided to try his hand at ranching. Watched him build this place from nothing. Her voice held deep affection. In all that time, I've never seen him as happy as he's been since you came into his life. I love him, Rachel admitted softly. More than I thought possible after Frank. That's why I'm afraid. If something happened to Jackson because of me. That boy can take care of himself, Martha assured her. And he's not without influence in this territory. The sheriff may have a badge, but Jackson has friends in the governor's office, connections with the territorial judiciary. Don't underestimate him. The reminder of Jackson standing in the community was reassuring. Unlike Frank, who had squandered what little influence he had through gambling and drinking, Jackson was respected, his word valued. If it came to a confrontation with Blackwell, he would not stand alone. Thank you, Martha, Rachel said, finishing her milk. You always seem to know exactly what to say. That's what happens when you get to my age, Martha replied with a smile. You've seen enough of life to know that most storms pass eventually if you're strong enough to weather them. The wedding was set for October, a small ceremony at the ranch rather than in town. Reverend Wilkins initially expressed reluctance to officiate, citing community concerns. But Jackson's quiet reminder about the generous donations the Williams family had made to the church building fund over the years quickly resolved his moral qualms. The guest list was limited to close friends and business associates, with Martha and Caleb standing as witnesses. Rachel wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that softened its elegant simplicity. Jackson, handsome in a new black suit, could hardly take his eyes off her as she walked toward him in the flower-decorated parlor of the main house. Dearly beloved, Reverend Wilkins began, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite his personal reservations. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Jackson Williams and Rachel Morley in holy matrimony. As they exchanged vows, Rachel felt the last shadows of her past receding. When Jackson placed a gold band on her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady and sure, his voice clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the Reverend declared. Mr. Williams, you may kiss your bride. Jackson's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, Rachel was surprised to see tears in Caleb's eyes, quickly blinked away when he noticed her looking. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with food prepared by Martha and several women from neighboring ranches. Even Scout had been groomed for the occasion, a blue ribbon tied around his neck as he trotted happily among the guests, accepting treats and affection. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Jackson found Rachel standing alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky. Mrs. Williams, he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Having second thoughts already, Rachel smiled, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. Not one, just taking a moment to appreciate how much has changed since I first came here. For the better, I hope, beyond anything I could have imagined. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. For seeing past the gossip to the person underneath. I saw you, Jackson said simply. The real you, not the version of you that small minds created. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. And I fall more in love with what I see every day. Their first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Rachel moved her belongings to the master suite, which Jackson had renovated to incorporate some of her favorite pieces from her former rooms. They established new routines: morning coffee together before the day's work began, shared responsibilities for ranch decisions, evenings spent planning for the future of the Lazy J. To Rachel's relief, Sheriff Blackwell seemed to have turned his attention elsewhere after the wedding. There were rumors that his brother's bid for re-election to the county commission had hit unexpected obstacles, possibly due to inquiries from the territorial governor's office regarding the family's business dealings. Nothing to do with us, I'm sure, Jackson had said when Martha mentioned the gossip, though the satisfaction in his eyes told Rachel otherwise. Her husband, she was learning, fought his battles quietly but effectively. The disputed water rights issue was eventually resolved through legal channels, with a formal survey confirming the original boundaries that placed the creek firmly within Lazy J territory. The Blackwells were granted limited access for watering their cattle, a compromise that Jackson had always been willing to offer. Rachel's property, still legally in her name despite her marriage, became a source of new opportunity when she suggested converting the cabin into a schoolhouse for the children of ranch workers and neighboring homesteads. Jackson enthusiastically supported the idea, and by spring, Rachel found herself teaching again 3 days a week, returning to a vocation she had loved and missed. On a warm May evening, nearly a year after Rachel had first arrived at the Lazy J, she and Jackson sat on their favorite porch, watching the sunset. Scout dozed at their feet, now fully recovered from his long-ago injury and devoted to both of them equally. I have something to tell you, Rachel said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Jackson turned to her, curiosity in his eyes. What is it? She took his hand, placing it gently against her stomach. We're going to have a baby. In December, Dr. Miller thinks. Jackson's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the span of heartbeats. A baby? You're certain? Rachel nodded, smiling at his reaction. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. Rachel, that's wonderful. He gathered her into his arms, careful despite his excitement. A child, our child. The awe in his voice brought tears to Rachel's eyes. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to describe it, Jackson said, pulling back to look at her. I love you so much, Rachel Williams. You've given me everything I never knew I was missing: partnership, love, and now a family. As they sat together planning for their expanding family, Rachel thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the prison of her first marriage to the freedom of her second. From a woman branded by gossip to one defined by love and respect. The road had been difficult, marked by pain and loss, but it had led her to this moment, this man, this life. And in the gathering twilight, with Jackson's arms around her and their child growing beneath her heart, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that she was, at last, truly free.